Thank you very much, Dr. Chirong. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we can open the floor now for questions, and please speak in the mic. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. My name is William Verdone. I'm connected with the Sierra Club and Environmental Group. Two words I have not heard in both presentations this morning, and I think, Dr. Karan, you may have been alluding to it, but Dr. Fusaro, you mentioned a component of oil in your vision of energy slide that we showed you had in the year 2020. The two words I haven't heard is a concept called peak oil, and that is the oil that is retrievable from the ground ends, and in the year 2020 it becomes a decline. It is no longer cost effective to go to Canada and retrieve oil from the tar sands because it costs more money to get little. So I'd like your impressions on peak oil and how that underscores the urgency of finding alternatives. Thank you.
I don't believe in peak oil. The reality is the low-hanging fruit, the low-cost oil has all been discovered. But there is a lot of fossil energy, specifically oil, distributed throughout the world that's going to cost a lot more money to create. And we've had the Hubbert curve since 1960, and that just keeps shifting. The world is running out of energy. And a very interesting thing's happened, because in 1978, I worked on natural gas curtailments in this country at the Department of Energy, and we were running out of natural gas. We didn't run out of natural gas. We've now found a 100-year supply of natural gas. So the point is, industry innovates, and the reality is we are going to exploit fossil energy. The real question is, as I mentioned several times, we have to do it in a much more environmentally benign way, and those days are over in terms of exploiting natural resources that way. But there's no shortage of oil.
Please, Dr. Karan.
I agree with the comment that it really is a function of the price of oil. So as a natural resource, you can go and find it and find more of it. But at what price to the economy, at what price to society, to the environment? We did not exit the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. We did not run out of stones. We just advanced. And I expect us to exit the fossil fuel age, not because we ran out, but because we see cleaner and better sources.
Thank you. I think I would just agree with the two comments that were made and respond to your question also by saying that indeed peak oil has been a shifting curve over the last 20, 30 years. And as we go deeper into the ocean, as we go into secondary and tertiary, maybe beyond new recovery of old oil in old fields, I think oil will be here and coal will be here. We just have to deal with them in a different way. And I think this is the vision we'd like to get out of this conference today. How can we combine the use of fossil fuels that will be phased out eventually, maybe in a century or more, and renewable, cleaner energy with less of a footprint on our environment? Because as you said this morning, what do we leave to our children? What do we want to leave to our children? What kind of a planet do we want to leave to our children? We're talking about 200 million cars in the US and 40 million cars in China, and this is how many cars per person? If you had as many cars in China as you do in the US per person, you'd need another planet. So I think we have to look at that vision both by building on this experience that we had this morning, your presentation, Peter, and yours, Dr. Karan and Dr. Chirong, and how can we combine these into something that is realistic, that is, of course, taking care of our future in a more environmentally friendly way, but that remains also economic, because at the end of the day, as you said, the price of oil or the price of energy of the last marginal barrel is going to determine what is the price of electricity. Next question. Yes, please.
Frank Pinto. I'm a senior energy and climate change advisor at UNDP. My question is for Drs. Curran and Mr. Fusaro. I'm very impressed with what has been happening on solar energy. But as Dr. Yumkela mentioned in the morning, especially for the least developed countries and others, it's not just providing the minimum amount of basic energy needs, but the additional amount needed for growth. Now, one of the ideas which came out a few years ago was concentrated solar power, CSP. And countries are now very interested, especially those countries in the tropics who have large arid areas, desert areas, etc. My question to both of you all is, have you all been involved in concentrated solar power? Do you think there's a potential for developing countries to go for it? Have the technological problems been met, or is there still work to be done? Thank you.
I'm assuming you're referring to the solar thermal concentrated, not the concentrated PV. Concentrated solar thermal power is very appropriate, but only in certain geographies. Because of the cooling that's required, you need typically water. And what we have seen is that where you have an abundant source of solar energy, typically water is scarce. So water gets to be more expensive. Few solar thermal plants were planned in the western part of the United States, and the plans got canceled because access to water and the cost of water was kind of an afterthought. And then people realized that water is more precious than energy, and that impacted the economic viability of such projects. But we believe in general that you really need a spectrum of solutions. It's not just PV, concentrated BPU, concentrated solar thermal. You will need many varieties that are dependent on that geography, that jurisdiction that is being served from an economic environment, from a natural resources point of view. There's hydro, there's geothermal, and you have to look. It's really not a global question as much as it is what is appropriate for a certain geography.
Yes. You have two mics on.
My question is primarily addressing Dr. Curran. From what I understand, one has to mine raw materials such as quartz and metal, which have to be treated to create the cells to assemble a solar module. So what is the ratio of pollution created, heavy metal emissions, and the energy consumed in creating a petro-solar panel, and the CO2 emissions throughout its lifespan versus the energy generated by a petro-solar panel over its lifespan?
So there's a payback curve that's a function of energy input and a function of the lifetime of the product itself, meaning take energy, transportation, labor, and translate it into energy in versus energy out. My personal view, we by the way, at Petrosolar, we don't make the panels themselves. We make semiconductor solutions, electronics, software, everything but the panel itself. We buy that from partners in the market. But if you think about the manufacturing of crystalline panels, we are an advocate of high efficiency mono and multicrystalline panels. That's silicon. That's the most abundant material on Earth. Silicon panels have been around for over 40 years. They're safe to the environment. The manufacturing process can be a very basic ingot manufacturing that's not that harmful to the environment if you manage the emissions. But I believe in looking at the total life cycle, and I'm with you, that one has to pay attention to how much energy goes in versus energy out, and environmentally clean manufacturing processes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yes, name is Tom Cadalla, Research Pays. There seems to be a lot of talk at MIT, in particular a presentation with Ernie Manzi, that there's a real need for acceleration for innovation. And the question here is, as we go through this R&D, and I heard earlier a quest for more R&D and so forth, There is R&D of the dot-com era, and there's R&D of the renewable area. And they're very different, and they certainly affect this entire argument because of the financial attraction and risk profiles. I'm just curious of your comments as to where and how we can scale R&D in an appropriate fashion and innovate fast enough so that we can come up with the right answers, I suppose, if that's what the goal is. Thanks.
I think we're going to share the question perhaps across the panel, but a general response would be that we're still riding the surf of the R&D of the 50s and the 60s, as was pointed out this morning very clearly. And obviously, there has not been enough money going into R&D from the government side. Just make a comparison with the defense budgets and R&D budgets for non-defense. And I think a point was also made this morning that the private sector has invested more in absolute terms and in percentage terms than the governments, and I think this becomes an issue that the governments have to take up. But I'd like to let my colleagues here talk about it too.
Is your question about which areas of R&D investment, or is it the dollar amount in general?
We don't hear you.
How the innovation can be accelerated. Because what's happening right now is we're focusing on one type of technology, but are we really looking, is there a process for innovation here that we need to put together and scale so that we can come up with faster answers? Because you can throw a lot of good money at some technologies and come out without any good results. So I don't feel a process here of acceleration on the innovation scale. And I see it more on a very specific scale of things that we already know and have experienced. So I'm just curious what's going on there.
Yeah. I think in the United States, at least, there has been a process that worked in the past by looking at DOE, DOD funding of kind of blue pie in the sky type of technologies, transformational initiatives and technologies that are really big gambles. And then you go from there to the SBIRs, you go beyond that to the venture capital community, and then the private equity, and then public companies, and so on. So there's a whole spectrum. There's a process actually in place that is mapped not only on the technology side, but the money trail. Who invests in which stage? And what we have seen, although people talk about the private sector investing, what is needed are is a clear framework, clear guideline from the public, from government. And now, can you control the process and say exactly where the money should go? You can try to some degree, but just give general guidelines, very strong and consistent guidelines, like what we have seen from other speakers on the percentage of reduction of CO2 and the NOx and so on. And frankly, the private sector will find very efficient ways of getting at that result. So I wouldn't try to micromanage where the R&D would go as much as put very clear guidelines in place.
Any other questions?